Welcome, everybody. Thank you for stopping by to another episode of Ministering Over Fostering. I am very excited, and I know so is Lakeisha, to have Jamie here today. Just a disclaimer, we are going to be talking about a topic that can be a little difficult to talk about, but we wanted to bring someone that could help us navigate through this topic because it is very real. And it happens to many more foster children and youth than we would like to believe that it happens to. And today we're going to be focusing a lot on suicide and suicide prevention. So without further ado, Jamie, can you please introduce yourself? Tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and why you're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to start by thanking you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So to just introduce myself, my name is Jamie. I am the chapter chair for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I cover the San Bernardino and Riverside areas, so we go all the way from Blythe, all the way to Temecula, and then onwards to Rancho Cucamonga. So we have a big area that we cover, but our focus is helping the community not only provide support, but also to break down the stigma of what suicide and suicide prevention entails, right? Because when we hear the word suicide, it brings up feelings. And unfortunately, most of us have experienced some type of loss or maybe struggle with feelings. So to give you some background, aside from the charity work that I do, I am an associate marriage and family therapist. So I'm working towards licensure, and part of my passion is to help support people when they feel most alone. 10 years ago, I did lose my dad to suicide, and it was just a moment that changed my life forever. And with my healing and my journey, it's helped bring me here today. So I hope that in some of my pain and in my own healing, I can give you guys some resources and guidance and hopefully hope about, when you are maybe feeling a little lost or need support after losing someone.
Thank you, Jamie, for being so transparent. And I know a little bit about your story. You and I go back to graduate school and we worked together during that time. But to see how you turned something so painful into something with so much purpose to help so many other people and advocate. It's one of the reasons why we wanted you to be here today. So with that being said, just based on the work that you do, what are some of those red flags or some of those indicators or even just populations that you see are most at risk for suicide?
Yeah, that's a great question. On the surface, when we hear, someone died by suicide or someone is struggling, we see maybe one thing, but there's so much else that's involved. There's biological factors, there's psychological factors, and what we see is usually what we call a life event. So this is like maybe losing a job, or a big breakup or a divorce or something that we can observe, but there's just been kind of like a storm that's been building up. And when I work with clients who have suicidal ideation, the first thing that I tell them is it's scary, right? But it's normal to have thoughts of not wanting to deal with that pain anymore, or just feeling really hopeless or lost or not enjoying things like we used to. It's when we leave those unchecked, when those feelings grow, when they start to intensify, or we feel like we're suffering in silence, can they really lead to a path that leads into a permanent solution, right? So we want to intervene much earlier in advance to try and get the support, get the intervention. You also mentioned about populations that are most at risk. So suicide is a leading cause, the number 10 leading cause of death, And that's more than things like homicide, war combined. So being in the top 10, there's such a need to talk about it more, but it's so hard to, right? Even if the word comes up or someone does have the courage and strength to say, yeah, I'm really struggling, then the person they're talking to might not know how to respond, right? Because it's such a very sensitive topic. So Populations at risk are adolescents, right? I think it's in the top 3 causes of death for that population. The LGBTQ plus community is also at risk. It's also very prevalent with military, both active and veterans. But it doesn't discriminate, right? It can affect all of us at any time. So I mentioned earlier about my dad. He was not only an immigrant to the country, he was a veteran. So he had all these challenges that stopped him from saying, Jamie, I need help, in a way that I could understand it, right? Because I also grew up with, and Myra knows this too, our culture in the Asian community, mental health does not exist. It's something that you sweep under the rug and you save face and you show that you're okay. And that's how we get through things, right? Is just pushing forward and not acknowledging it. But that's exactly how I was talking about earlier. It grows and it builds and it becomes this very deadly force. So we want to intervene before that ever happens and get them support and get them resources and get them to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, incredible.
That's so true what you stated, just about different cultures, because I'm biracial. So when I think of, in general, what I've experienced of just being African American, a lot of times you're taught, oh, well, we'll just pray about it.
Yep.
And, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like there are resources out there to pray and partake in those resources as well. So I agree that it's very important, if anybody is out there struggling with these concerns, to seek help.
Yeah. And it's so crazy because, even in school, I remember when we took the suicidology course, one of the things that was so shocking to me is we all come in with the assumption that if you bring this subject up, someone who's thinking of suicide is going to be pushed into suicide. Right. Or if we ask the question, it's like kind of pushing them to doing it. And it's so the opposite. So many times I'm assuming some of them would wish that someone would ask the question bluntly, or just even inquire if they're doing okay, if there's anything that they would need, because they might be so afraid of speaking up, which is why we wanted to bring this topic out to the forefront so that more people just know what to do and they're well equipped. And so with that being said, as you know, we work with foster children, foster youth, resource parents, and these children have been removed from their home. They've experienced trauma. There's all of these other indicators that kind of become barriers and risks that make them a high risk population. Right. So one of the questions that we have for you, Jamie, is if we have a resource parent or foster parent who a child has said they're having suicidal ideation, or they even have a plan for suicide, what is something that the resource parents can do to help this child and to make sure that they get adequate support?
That is a fantastic question. Primarily, what I want to start with is building a safety plan. And the reason why is we never know when a crisis can hit. And especially when I think of my own teenage years, how quickly our moods can change or things can happen to us that can just take us to that next level. So first would be to make a safety plan. How will I know that things are getting really bad? So something like, okay, let's scale that level of pain from 0 to 10. 0 is like, I don't want to die. I have no thoughts of wanting to take my life. To 10 being like, here's my plan, right? Here's how I'm going to do it. And this is when I'm going to do it. That's how we know those. So those 3 factors are the danger zone. If you have a plan, you have the means to do it, and there is a timeline of when you want that to happen. So that's why the safety plan can be helpful, and not only the foster parents knowing when things have reached a point where they have to get immediate assistance, to also empowering the children as well to be like, okay, I'm in a really bad place. This is what we talked about. Here's where I need to go for help. So if it's immediate, meaning like there's that moment of crisis right now, 911 is the first place that we want to reach out to. If that's not available, taking them to the nearest hospital. All hospitals are required to what we call 5150. So if someone is in danger of themselves, the hospital will hold them for up to 72 hours to evaluate them, and then it can be extended if needed too. The other thing is maybe there's not so much of a immediate crisis, but these feelings are really intense. They often show up in the middle of the night when we feel most alone. So there is a 24-hour, 365-day resource, and that's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number is 1-800-273-TALK. And I think I wrote down the number, it's 8255. You can call that number at any time of the day, and you'll be connected to a live person who's trained to talk to you about moments where you are feeling maybe at your worst, right? There's also a text number, which is actually really successful for adolescents and children, because then they don't have to worry about someone else hearing, or maybe, the foster parents overhearing in the other room. And that number, you can just text to 741-741. Same thing, it's also available every day, all day long. And I definitely encourage you, even if there's not a moment of crisis, just to try it out. Call the number or text the number and see what kind of response you get, because it's helpful to know what's on the other side of that and who's providing the support. So that's for immediate emergencies, or maybe just people who are having more of an intense suicidal ideation, or things are getting pretty bad. Otherwise, I do recommend always connecting to some kind of mental health support. And that doesn't always have to be with a therapist, right? It's not for everyone. And therapy does involve you making the commitment to put the work in. And sometimes life just doesn't have us in that place, especially for foster children who are going through trauma, who are going through these transitions. That can be really hard for them to open up to yet another person, right? So maybe that's not the right time, but helping them find maybe a support group, right? Or connecting them to local resources in the city, and agencies like yours that help this type of population can help all support and build their resilience, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to build their protective factors and keep them safe, so that way it doesn't lead down a road where it can put them in grave danger.
I love the idea that there is a text option, because I'm thinking of, just like you stated, like some of these teenagers, they might feel a little bit more comfortable where they're not busy, they're not hearing a voice, but it's just like a safety that they can text and know that someone is supporting them on the other end. So I really love that option.
Mm-hmm. And it's confidential. I can do it in the middle of my room and nobody has any idea, because maybe they're not even ready to share this. Especially I'm thinking with foster parents, it might be a whole new person in my life who I have not even built trust with yet. I don't know how they're going to react or what they're going to say, but if I can text someone that's neutral, who can't judge me, who can't tell me, this might be the best way to go about that. So with that too, Jamie, one of the things that we've seen is social media is a huge thing. There's actually something called cyberbullying, which a lot of people don't realize is real, but it's out there. And there's so many high-level expectations through social media, particularly for young girls who might be seeing certain body images and these fantasies of what it looks like. And then I know there's so many games now where you can chat and talk to people who you may not even know, and they may be telling you stuff that kind of creates this hopelessness or helplessness. What are some tips that foster parents can utilize to safeguard their kids, foster children, from these types of potential risks?
Yeah. I know, like for me, the way social media has evolved is very different than how I grew up. So I love how you're talking about cyberbullying. Technology is just part of their upbringing now. I highly recommend two things. The first is to know what they're doing, right? It's one thing to let them have independence, and that's such an important part of our development, but also know what they're getting into, right? If they're going to play Minecraft, know who they're playing with, or just be involved and understand what does that entail. The other thing is to have conversations, talk candidly, right? Like how you mentioned earlier, when we were in grad school together, we had this perception of what could possibly happen, right? We might do more harm by asking them, hey, Jamie, are you thinking about taking your life? I noticed you've been feeling really sad lately. But that doesn't trigger a suicide. If anything, it can help prevent it because someone else is noticing that we're suffering. So having very open conversations and also equipping just the whole family with ways of how to talk to one another in a way that's, empathetic and caring, it can go such a long way. Because when I look back in my own experience, how much I wish I had asked questions like that. Like, hey, Dad, are you okay? Right? Do you need support? And looking back now, it can sound easy to say, hey, Jamie, are you thinking about killing yourself? But that's a really hard question to ask someone you love and care about. And especially too, I can imagine how challenging it can be for a foster parent to also be able to ask if that's okay. So I do recommend trying to practice it. I know it sounds super cheesy, but it helps in those moments when we're dealing with our own, fears or just worries, because that person can possibly be relying on us to start a conversation, and it starts with us, right?
Yeah, I've actually personally had a few situations where I've had to have this question with somebody that I know, and I think it's harder for the person asking the question because you're afraid of the response.
Yeah.
If they say yes, what do I do? What did I just open? I'm not equipped to help them, or I don't want to hear that, right? As a person on the other side, I don't want to hear that. I love this person. I know this person. It's such a scary thought. But if we don't ask it, then we don't open the doors for them to share what they're dealing with and what's going on. So I love the fact that you're saying, if you are going to work with children, you might want to practice asking this question. So if you ever do have to ask it, you're not afraid of using the word, right? Yeah. Even just the word, are you thinking of killing yourself? It sounds so scary and heavy, but you might at some point have to ask it, and you have to be comfortable actually saying the word, because if you say, are you thinking of harming yourself or hurting yourself, that can have such a broad definition, right?
Yep.
But the word killing yourself, there's nothing left unspecified, and so you just have to get so comfortable with the terminology, and it's so scary.
Also, what came to my mind is, if a family gets the placement of a child or teenager that maybe they're constantly saying, like, I'm going to do this, to not take those things lightly. It is not always attention seeking. There is something behind that. So, I do think to get in the practice of continuing to practice that and becoming comfortable, that's very important for anybody.
One of the things that you were sharing already, Jamie, is a few resources. So you shared with us the idea of going to call 911 if needed, if it's an emergency. They can also go to a nearest hospital where they can get evaluated. And then there was the crisis, the 24-hour crisis phone number you've already shared, and of course the texting. Are there any other resources that you might have?
Yeah, I do recommend, depending on the type of person. So for example, the Asian community, we have our own number too, as well as persons who are LGBTQ+, we have like the Trevor line, right? And that provides another additional resource. So there are resources available, like even now I'm thinking about NAMI has like a breakdown of so many different kinds. A community partner, or for foster parents, like if there's a social worker, the social worker is designed to have a compiled resources that can help that parent. So it's important to just ask questions. So I think just being okay too with saying, you know what, I need help. This is the child that I have, and I'm not sure how to approach it. And then, you know, leaning on a social worker, or, you know, you guys can always reach out to me as well. We'll find out together, because there's a lot out there. It's just really being able to figure out, you know, what's the best resource for that particular individual.
Mm-hmm. Where's the best place where they can find some of these resources? Is there a particular website that you would recommend, a particular Google search or social media platform? Where's the best place that's kind of not a one-stop shop, but they can look it up and find a very quick answer if needed?
I highly recommend the National Suicide Prevention Lifelines website, because they list not only, like NAMI is also a very popular one too, but they have different nonprofits from all different kinds of backgrounds on their page. And I'll just make sure to link that one to you guys too. But I do think theirs is one that I recommend to people, usually specifically looking for information about, you know, like how to support someone who is suicidal, or how to get support for someone who's lost someone to suicide. So as far as that realm goes, that's what I recommend. In general, when it comes to mental health, I think NAMI is a great resource because there's just a lot available. But of course, it can look overwhelming when you're skimming through everything. So getting someone to kind of help you navigate through those things can be helpful too.
And we'll link all of those things that you provide to us as well at the end of the interview, where it's just easy to click on and kind of go from there. And then we'll also include all of those labels and information. And you know, I think this was such a rough topic, right? It feels heavy just talking about it. There's no way to go around it. But one of the final questions, and I guess to end the interview in a positive way, is how can we, as an agency, as foster parents, how can we foster hope? How can we help someone find hope if they are in a very difficult situation? What are some of the ways that we can help them find that?
We already have it, and that's the empathy and love we have for each other. As humans, we're just biologically wired to want to connect. So sometimes we forget that part, right? When we are so stressed out in our own worlds, or like we've been just trained to be defensive or to kind of hide away from that. But especially when I think about like the foster youth, it's so challenging to open up, right? What they go through is so challenging and difficult. But having that empathy, right? Whether it's the foster parent, whether it's the social worker, whether it's just the people around them. But if we can remember how powerful love can be, and just understanding one another and not jumping to our own conclusions about what we think we might know, but to let that person tell us what they're feeling or what they're going through, it can make all the difference. And I love how you talked about a little while ago about what comes up for you if someone does say, actually, yes, I am suicidal, because then that takes us to another place that we weren't really ready for. But if we can just slow it down and just listen, that is the biggest step. If we can help them feel comfortable telling us when they're in pain, or that they're having these really scary thoughts, then what comes after, it will be scary and challenging, but this is the first step, because the other The other alternative is that they continue to keep everything internalized and not share. And it grows like poison in a way, because it's left unfiltered. It can have free reign to do whatever it wants. And our brains are so complicated and just amazing, but it can be overruled with different chemicals that take away, like serotonin, which helps keep us, in a good mood and pleasant. So to go back to what you were saying earlier, just remembering to listen, to be there in that moment and just listen. And then what comes from there, we'll figure it out, right? But to start with, at the very core, it's just to care and be supportive.
I love that you say that, because Lakeisha and I just came back from a very beautiful event. We were having a conversation after the event, and we were talking about one of the ideas that we've always had in our heart for this agency is to have this open door policy for our youth, where, we just can almost dream of our youth already just coming in and sitting down at our desk and just walking in at any time, even after they've left our agency, to tell us how things are going, to come and talk to us about some of the hardships that happened that day. We had a few young kids come to our booth, and some of them did not want to leave our booth. They were sitting there with us. And, I was able to hug one of these youth through their process and their transition. And Lakeisha was able to be there for another youth who was going through some hardship. And I think that as an adult, we don't realize how much of an impact, a positive impact, we can have in the life of a foster youth or foster child just by being genuine and being present. And I think back to some of the situations in my life where I had these amazing women where sometimes they couldn't fix my pain because there was nothing they could say or do, but with a simple embrace and just them holding me while I let all of those heavy emotions out, made me feel like it's hard and it hurts and it's not fair, but I'm gonna be okay. And I'm gonna be okay to continue on to tomorrow, whatever is to come. And I think that we can't take that lightly. And I'm so glad that this topic is opening up this just conversation where we have more influence than we think sometimes in the life of these youth, if we are just a constant through the good and the bad, just a constant. That's all they need.
When you're saying a constant, it's so true, because I think of youth in the foster care system. They're so used to seeing people leave their home. Leave in and out of their life. They're used to seeing their bio family. They're used to not having those visitations anymore because siblings have been placed in different homes, used to not keeping in contact with former resource parents if they moved a new home, and social workers change often too. So I think it is important to make that impact and to remain in these children's lives if you can, because you are ultimately showing them love. You are being a role model for them, and you're letting them know, hey, you may not be answering, at this time, but I'm still here should you need that help.
It's incredible. Yeah. Is there anything else, Jamie, that you feel we didn't touch or we didn't open up that you'd like to share as final thoughts before we close out today?
Well, what comes up most on my heart is just to thank you both so much for your time. Talking about suicide is really hard, and there's some agencies that do turn us away because they don't think that they want to invite that kind of conversation. So I appreciate so much that we can talk about this. The last thing that I'd mention is also just to take care of yourselves too, right? Of course, we want to be there to support people who are struggling. It's also really important to look after ourselves too, to slow down and make sure that for us to do our best for someone who needs us, we also have to look after ourselves too.
Yeah, that helps. That happens so much with the helpers. So many people, we end up carrying a lot of things on our shoulders, and I think you're right. And that's such an important call for our foster parents, that they can request a break when they need a break, because without them taking care of themselves first, there's no way they can help other children. Right. So Jamie, just thank you so much for accepting this invitation. We are so absolutely grateful. I have a feeling this is not going to be the only time we're going to see your face here. So grateful, and we appreciate your time. So we will be sharing all of these resources, and we look forward to more. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.